Good everyone, welcome along to the Political Pulse. It's that time of the week again where we get together and we talk about issues to do with politics in the broadest sense. And today we're in, the second day of Level 1. So I was able to come into the studio this morning, just getting ready, and Michael Wilson was here, and I leaned over and I shook his hand, and I must say it's nice, and we've got a guest here I'm going to introduce in a moment. It's nice to be able to shake hands. And for those, I guess, who you know even better than shaking hands, you can even give them a hug as well. But it's also challenging, I think, as we move into Level 1 to kind of renegotiate upstairs what it means in terms of your engagement with people and travelling on public transport, those sorts of things. Hey, the topic for today is the media. And the media, I guess, has been quite relevant while we've been in COVID. I mean, it's always relevant, and it's always relevant in the context of politics. How's it relevant in the context of politics? Well, it's relevant in as much as it's where we get our information about what's happening in the political world. So maybe on television, it may be on the radio, and it may be through our local newspaper. So that's where we find out who's saying what. It's also, I guess, relevant in the sense that the news media identifies what the issues of the day are, and the person we're going to be, who's our guest today, we'll talk to him about, how decisions are made, maybe about the prominence that are given to sort of some issues. I guess it's also relevant in the context of media as an aspect of public policy. So for politicians, and we saw this, I guess, through COVID, what's the best way to, if you like, regulate the media? Do you want dispersed or concentrated ownership? Does it matter that the same people who own newspapers also own radio stations and also own television stations and these sorts of things? And I guess for those of us sometimes who've reflected on the power of international media barons like Rupert Murdoch and occasionally watch Fox News, we might reflect on those kinds of issues. But anyway, today it's about the local. And it's my very great pleasure to welcome into the studio Grant Harding, who's the editor of the Wairarapa Times-Age. And for those of you who are watching, here's my copy from today. Grant, it's a real pleasure. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us. And let me say at the outset how much I enjoyed the editorial today in the Wairarapa Times-Age, because for those of you who haven't read it, and I encourage you to read it, it's an editorial actually reflecting on what the move down to COVID Level 1 means. You wrote it, so I'm not going to paraphrase it, but also some of the challenges about making decisions about what's going to happen at the border. And one of the takeouts for me from the editorial today was it really does matter that we make evidence-based decisions about the border, because the gains have been hard won and they've been costly. And we need to be confident now as we progressively open up that border is robust, that the systems that are there at the border are actually going to ensure that we keep COVID at bay. So anyway.
Well, we don't want to be in Level 1 forever, do we, Chris? We want to actually go back to normal life. So, there's a need to, make sure that the borders are secure at this stage. Hopefully, as the world gets better and it gets on top of COVID-19, we can actually return to the opportunity to travel those who can afford it. And even sooner, hopefully, Australia will come on the stream in some form. And because, as I wrote in the editorial, they are the bulk of our, well, they're the largest group of travellers to our country. Not the biggest spenders, but they spend the most because of the numbers that come here. So, yeah, there's work to do. But, you know, I've just had a coffee at Don Luciano, and as is his way, Marvin Guerrero came up and gave me a big hug. You know, couldn't get away from it. So my social distancing went out the window, mate. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm pleased to hear that. I'm pleased to hear that.
Yeah.
And it was a pleasure shaking your hand this morning too.
Yeah.
Grant, you're editor of the Wairarapa Times Age. It's the Wairarapa's paper of record. I was doing a wee bit of research, and I see that it was founded actually in 1878. It's housed in what I think is one of the more beautiful buildings actually in Masterton as you travel down the main road there. It's spectacular. I'm not much on architecture, but it does have a bit of an Art Deco quality to it, the building.
It certainly does. Yeah.
Certainly does.
Yeah.
But turning to you, how do you come to be editor of the Wairarapa Times Age? What's your story?
Oh, I've been in the media since 1987. You know, I went to university, and then after university I did the bums trail pretty much. I went to and worked in factories, went and did my army training to be the territorials, to clean university out of my system. And then I played rugby and cricket, and I travelled, and I came back, and I went back to the freezing works, worked in the freezers, shifting cartons out of there, and I'd always wanted to be a journalist. I'd applied once in 1982 and missed out. And so I went back and had another crack at the end of 86 and got into Wellington Polytech. And at the end of that year, I'd impressed the Dominion blokes when I did my internship there, and they gave me a job. So I was very lucky to be on the Dominion in those days. Some fantastic staff, you know. We had magnificent chief reporters, news editors. Carl Dufresne lives here in Wairarapa. But, you know, some great names there that the audience probably would know, but they were tremendously gifted leaders. Funny thing was, you know, Jeff Bayliss, who was the editor at the time, I don't think I ever saw him except at a function. He never talked to me personally, but he sent me 2 memos, which I've got in a scrapbook somewhere. You know, that's the separation of the editor from the newsroom was quite distinct in those days. You know, so I went from the Dominion. I did a crazy thing and entered Mastermind, and was a bit of a rugby expert, and got through to the final, and suddenly Julie Christie up in Auckland saw me on television, and she now Dame Julie Christie, she was the producer of a rugby show that was about to go to that they'd got money for, and so she employed me, or headhunted me, and I decided that was better than third rugby writer on the Dominion, which is what they were offering me. So I went up there and did a couple of years in TV, and then sort of that finished, and I went off to Rugby News magazine as assistant, then editor, and about 1999 I decided to move on from there. There was opportunities to do documentaries, get back into television, and worked for Julie for another year on a TV show, and then Sky, that ended because TVNZ lost the rights to rugby, so I went to Sky for 7 years, and then pretty much exhausted actually. After that I decided to have a break, and ended up living back in Hawke's Bay and commuting to Auckland, and went to Hawke's Bay Today for 5 years, and then did a terrible thing and went into communications at a DHB of all places, and hated it, and then needed a job, so saw the Wairarapa Times Age on Trade Me, had a crack, and got the job.
Great.
Yeah.
Great. Oh, that's a fascinating backstory. So home for you was, am I right, it was Hawke's Bay?
Hawke's Bay is where I was brought up, you know, but I spent, 5 years in Wellington, 15 years in Auckland, you know, a few years overseas. So and then, definitely that's what I would call home, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And had a initial crack, and then got into that program at the Wellington Polytechnic. I have to say, I've got good friends who went through that particular program, and I think it, by the sound of it, it was a good program, a good grounding, and produced some pretty good journalists.
You know, like, I don't call journalism a profession; I call it a trade.
Yeah.
You know, and there's only one way to learn journalism, that's to get out and work. So I think courses, they're okay. You know, they give you a basic understanding of what's required, and to be fair, there's some things that I learnt on that course that I still remember, you know, quite clearly. But really, it was getting out and working, you know, and showing that keenness and you know, wanting to go the extra mile. That gets you somewhere in journalism, and you know, that's what I remember from Fred Tullett and Dave Hallaby, who were the chief reporters, and Alan Sanson actually. They were the chief reporters at the Dominion at the time, and that was their phrase: "Go the extra mile." You know?
Extra mile.
Yeah, ask that extra question, and if you didn't ask it the first time, ring again. You know, and you know, they weren't hard; they were just fair, and they just pushed you in the right directions. And you know, I think Fred and Dave, you know, even though they were chief reporters, they broke the first GST fraud story in New Zealand. You know, they were amazing mentors, and I probably shouldn't have gone to the Hawke's Bay office after a year. I would have learnt a lot more, because in the Hawke's Bay office, I had a mate of mine, and we got up to all sorts of shenanigans. But you know, there was kind of there was just good people. They came back and told you stuff like, you know, if you wrote overly creatively about a nasty accident, and they'd come back and say, good creative writing, but you got to think of the family, you know,
yes.
and those kind of things. So the lessons that those guys could offer you so easily, you know, and it was a great grounding to work for the Dominion, and a very privileged to go as a first job.
As a first job. So interning with the Wellington Poly journalism there, and then on, and obviously a really diverse kind of range of not just you know, across a range of media, television, Sky TV, TVNZ.
I've even done rugby commentary on the radio. You know, I've done, sport was my thing, and always wanted to be a sports journalist. Probably since I was stayed home from school when I was about 7 and listened to the Olympics on the radio. You know, pretending to be sick. But you know, I really wanted to be at the top level of sport, and I got there. You know, I got to follow the All Blacks. You know, I went to you know, on tours for the British Lions in South Africa around New Zealand. I went to South Africa with the All Blacks. I went to the UK with the All Blacks. So I got to do that, and that was, you know, that was really great. And then I got to work in television. You know, on a program, a weekly program, all about rugby, and it was kind of, you know, a fantastic thing. But I got to say, you know, by about 2006, when I had about 7 years of it, I was getting a little bit bored of the rugby and a little bit exhausted. I wanted something different, something a bit easier, because, you know, but what I've found out in the media is there's nothing easy. It's always hard. You know, it's always hard work. Doesn't matter what it is. The hours are not fantastic. You know, and to get the right product, you have to work pretty hard, you know, and it's very rare that you get the right combination of people and vision to produce something that you're truly proud of. And you know, I can go back to through my career in television, and there's probably about 3 things that, you know, that I think, you know, that they are the things that I remember as being awesome, and it was because of the people buying into a single vision, you know.
Can you think of, I mean, without pushing you, can you think of one of those 3 things at this stage?
Oh yeah, we went on we did a documentary in 1999 at the World Cup. It was called On Tour with the All Black Army, and basically the basic idea was to go with a tour party and cover the World Cup, and you know, we had an exceptional director. I was a producer, and the director actually now is highly involved. Well, I think he's a producer of MasterChef in England. Right. Yeah, he was a sharp guy. But the best thing about him is that he understood a story, and you know, and I remember when New Zealand lost to France in the semi-final that year. Anyway, the next morning we woke up and we're sitting around. Everyone's a bit sort of like jaded because we had a few drinks the night before to get over it. And you know, the cameraman sort of going, "Oh, that's probably the end of our story." And I said, "No, that's the beginning of our story. You know, that's the beginning of our story. The All Blacks have lost. How are these people going to react? You know, how's this tour party going to react to that? What are they going to say about it?" And that's the story. And that director, he understood that. You know, he perfectly understood that. So he kept working hard right through that week, and we came out with a great documentary, which was nominated first of all in the Film and Television Awards, and then it didn't win there, but then it went to the Qantas Awards, as they were called then.
Yes.
And we were up against a highly funded Olympic documentary and America's Cup. And someone asked me beforehand, "How do you think you're going?" I said, "We'll win." I said, "We'll win because it's quality. It's quality." And yeah, that was pretty bravado, I guess. But yeah, we did win.
But you were right.
Yeah, we did win. Yeah, because sometimes you just know when you've done something good, you know. And we had very little preparation time. We got the money at the 11th hour. I actually had to scream at the bank one day when I was in there because I'd put money in a visa, and it wasn't coming out of the visa. I had to get people out of the country that day, and I went in there. I said, "I put the money in the visa yesterday, and I'm not getting it out now." And they said, "Oh, well, it takes 24 hours." And I said, "Well, I didn't say that on the phone message," and I screamed at them in the bank, and suddenly the bank manager emerged and the thing was sorted out. But yeah, so we were under a lot of pressure to get out of the country even, and then, you know, there's a whole other range of story to that which I won't go into, but the things that happened over there, it was just seat of the pants. You know, It really was seat of the pants because we weren't accredited. We just had to work around the fringes, and yeah, it was hugely satisfying.
Oh, sounds it. In fact, I'd like to chase it down and watch it.
Yeah.
Okay. So now you're in the role of editor. I mean, what was there any? You said that you saw the position come up as editor of the Wairarapa Times Age, and you'd reached a point where obviously something different. It was you'd worked under editors. What attracted you to it?
Well, to be honest with you, I wanted the job. I needed the job, but. You know, the funny thing is I could have been the editor of the Wairarapa Times Age a long time ago because when I was at Hawke's Bay Today, it was under APNZ, and they wanted me to leave Hawke's Bay Today and go and be an editor in Rotorua or Wairarapa or whatever, and I just wanted to be in Hawke's Bay, you know, because my kids were there, the family was there. I wanted that base, and I also knew everything about Hawke's Bay, so I figured that was how it should work. But they had some weird system where you had to go and be an editor, you know, in another place, which is not that easy. You know, it's quite difficult to do that. You know, to have that local knowledge. So I didn't move, and consequently, you know, when I really should have got the editorship, I didn't, and that was you know, like 4 years into my time there, and I think the previous editor just said to them, "You should employ him," you know, and they didn't. So I worked another year there, and then I left. You know, so I could have actually come here a long time ago,
right?
But yeah. Yeah, so I needed the job, came here, did the interview. That's it, really.
Right. Yeah. And it's obviously a hands-on role, and the Times Age now, once upon a time, was, I think, part of the NZME stable, but it's now locally owned.
That's right. Andrew Denham owns it.
Yeah, Andrew Denham owns it. Right, yeah. And he's local. He's
definitely local.
Yeah,
and he's the publisher and owner. Yeah. Or owner and publisher, whichever way you want to put it around. But and I think, you know, one of the things I said to Andrew when he was first employing me, I said, "You don't have too many meetings, do you?" Because I hate meetings. You know, they waste of time. There's things to do, and you know, places like NZME and APNZ, they have meetings to organise meetings. You know, and it just used to brass me off the waste of time that sort of stuff was, because I'm there to serve the paper, you know. That's what I'm there for. I'm there to do that job, try and make it as good as possible every day. to me, sitting around wasting time is not what I'm about. And so that was Andrew and I. But Andrew, I think he took it over about 2016. And it's probably a model that will be replicated quite a bit, I would imagine, in the future around the country. Because I can't see stuff hanging on to all their titles. That single owner, local, hyper-local even, it's a good model.
It's a good model.
Yeah.
So in terms of, you said you work for the paper, there's obviously that connection with you and your relationship with the Times Age. I mean, as editor, in terms of your relationship, say, with the owner, do you have that independence? What's the nature of the relationship, you have between you and the owner? He
very rarely says much to me about the way we run the paper. I think he's pretty happy the way I do it.
Yes.
And so I'm sure he'd come down if he didn't, if he wasn't. But we've had no real dramas about the way I run the paper.
No.
There's always a fine line in local media. You've got to be careful, and there's always a fine line in all forms of media because we do rely on advertising. Advertising is crucial, and you have to be careful how you operate. But I'm a believer in fairness as well. There was a story recently that did sneak through from social media. It came out of social media. Now the problem with social media is that people just fire off.
Yes.
So let's give this example. I went to the doctor. And the doctor overcharged me. But instead of ringing them back and saying you've overcharged me, people were on social media, they overcharged me, Well, I think, that's pretty tough. You could have made the call, they would have given you your money back. That's the end of the story. That's how we used to do business. That's how people dealt with each other, But today, things just kind of blow up out of nowhere, And I think you've got to operate with a little bit of caution,
Right. In terms of politics and how you cover politics, obviously you've got the benefit of sourcing material through from NZME, New Zealand Herald.
That's right.
So you're picking up on some of that copy, and as well you've got your own team of journalists working here, working the region. Is that the balance between the two? Yeah, I mean, obviously we don't do the national pages or the world pages. They come out of NZME. So the local content part of it, when I first came here, there was 3 reporters covering councils. So we probably didn't have a dedicated Greater Wellington Regional Council, but we've had someone sort of overviewing it. But all the other councils' meetings are covered. Since then, the local democracy reporter has been funded by New Zealand On Air and Radio New Zealand, that particular partnership, and I believe that may roll over in September. So there is a feeling that there is a huge need to have councils covered. We already had it covered, so we're a bit lucky to have a local democracy reporter. It's a great luxury for us, council, court, sport, pretty crucial for local paper. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
So and that's all there. On I guess the bigger issue, national politics, while you're getting the feed coming through from the New Zealand Herald, and you've got some of the journos, the Audrey Youngs, Barry Soper, I think, makes an appearance in today's issue.
Yeah.
But there will be the intersection between national politics and local politics comes when we have an election. So we've got an election coming up this year.
That's right.
And I guess I'll ask you this as a hypothetical. So we come up against closer and closer to the election date. Would it ever get to the point, do you think, I guess I'm talking about your degree of comfort with this sort of hypothetical, where you might say, well, on balance, we think there's an argument for taking an editorial position that, we need a change of government, or we need a retention of government, or this particular candidate has more to offer the Wairarapa electorate than this other candidate? Or would you be more inclined to sort of keep a bit of distance from those sorts of issues?
Well, naughty Peter Martinez wrote an editorial recently which suggested that New Zealand would be better off with a majority government, and I think that was a fair piece from him. To write that a majority government would allow us to, them to get on with business. So he's already done that. Personally, I will be taking a very middle road line towards the election. I don't believe we should ever tell voters what to do.
Yes.
Absolutely not. And as of Monday, will be our last political columnist, because all our politicians around here, Kieran McAnulty, the sitting MP, Alistair Scott,
yes,
who's retiring, of course, Ron Mark, and Mecca Whaitiri, they will not be appearing in their columns after Monday. Alistair's the final one in that particular roster, and so that's ending because electioneering begins on the 19th, and I think it's very important that from that point on, I'm sure we'll get a lot of pressure from certain politicians to put their point of view in the paper, and we'll have to be very mindful of how we do that. And I can tell you this, when I started at Hawke's Bay Today, one of the major failings of that paper in the previous few years was when the editor wrote an editorial on the front page telling people how to vote.
Right.
I'm not here to tell people what to do. No. I'm just here to try and present things in a reasonably fair and balanced way. I think Peter's editorial was quite interesting. It was good. It was a good discussion piece. But that's not what I would do. That's not how I roll, as they say.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it's going to be interesting times, and who knows what for anyone.
We don't know what the economic fallout's going to be.
We don't know what the economic fallout's going to be. We don't. The scenarios are indicating a range of possibilities, and we don't know what effect that's going to have on politics. And
I think it's going to be a very interesting election in Wairarapa. That's for sure.
Yeah, I think I think you're right, and it's one thing about this sort of electoral system we've got. It does allow for strategic voting, and I think probably an electorate like the Wairarapa electorate this time round, I think we might see a little bit more strategic voting than we've seen in the past. It won't just see a straight tick across the line, two ticks, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens. Now, I was doing a bit of research, and I see that, and this is from this year, April 17, that the Times Age was named as a Voyager finalist.
Yeah, that's right.
What's that about?
Well, the Voyagers is basically the National Media Awards, and circulation under 30,000 papers have their own category, because there's only 4 papers left over 30,000 now. The Dom, the Herald, of course,
yes,
was about 100,000. Yeah. The Press,
Christchurch Press,
the Press, and the Otago Daily Times, and of course, I'm not sure about the Sunday edition, but of course the Weekend Herald would be up there, but they're not in that category. We're in the under 30,000. Our circulation is down about 5,000. It's at about 5,000, so it was a pretty good effort to make that, because that's where the bulk of New Zealand's newspapers is in that under 30,000. Waikato Times won. Very good paper, very strong paper, and they produce some. They have the luxury of being able to tap into the Bay of Plenty as well,
right.
They're a good paper. They deserve to win.
Right, yeah. But clearly the Times Age equally.
We were happy. I mean, when we did I think when you enter something, you've got to be happy that you entered it.
Absolutely.
You're good enough to sit there, and Bevan Wills, our operations manager, and I went through every paper for the year, and we had a look, and we came up with the 4 papers. You're only allowed to enter one Saturday. We had 2 Saturdays, so we had to eliminate one. That's where we got to, and it's kind of and we looked at each other and pretty much said we're satisfied that we've got a chance, and so to me, all the journalists need to do that as well. They need to be able to do that, because that's how you review your year's work.
Yeah.
And you go, I can enter some categories because I have done some good work, and that's the kind of goal I'll be setting for the journalists in the next year. Is you need to be able to come to the end of the year and be able to put an entry in. Doesn't matter whether you don't get nominated, but you need to feel comfortable to put an entry in.
Yeah, great, ready to go with that portfolio. Well, look, it's been an absolute pleasure, and thank you for coming in and having a chat. It's been really good to get your sense of the role of a paper like the Times Age, and how you came to be at the helm, and have a chat about that whole issue of editorial independence, and how you make those decisions, and what your general
it's local people in the paper, isn't it? That's what it is.
It's local people, and and even times in the past, I think I might have been interviewed by one of your good journalists,
and a very good petition it was, Chris.
Thank you. Yeah. Yes, we should add here that for listeners that. And the relevance of this will become clear, that Grant's birthday is the 5th of November. I happen to know that because the 5th of November, listeners will also be aware, is a time of the year where, and I won't editorialise on this, no pun intended, Grant, at this particular point in time, but I have a strong view actually on fireworks, and once upon a time I haven't done it before and wasn't even sure why I did it. Well, I know why I did it, but it was unusual for me. I kind of launched a petition which ended up with 28,000 signatures, people supporting an end to private sale of fireworks. And for those of us who have close relationships with animals and who don't like to see destruction of property and things. Anyway, as I said, I won't editorialise on it, but I was interviewed by the paper. Well, the other thing that's... so 5th of November, interesting date. And level 1, Grant, this weekend, Super Rugby.
Super Rugby Aotearoa on Saturday, 5 o'clock and 3 o'clock on Sunday.
Yeah.
And what
afternoon rugby.
What great times to watch rugby. It's completely anti-Sky. But it's fantastic to be seeing rugby played at those times. Much more family friendly.
Yes.
Kids can go along with their parents and not have to be carried out of the ground afterwards half knackered. And it's going to be a great competition. I think the players will be fizzing. They're all black trials every game. I'm really looking forward to it, actually. Much more than the Super Rugby. It was pretty much dead to the world for me, and this is going to be great.
Interesting comp. And I must say, I've had a look at a couple of times at the NRL feed coming through from Australia to start playing there, and I'm afraid the canned audience noise just doesn't.
You got to feel for the players.
Doesn't do it for me.
Yeah, you got their adrenaline levels must be down.
Yes.
Everything must be down. I mean, they're entertainers. These guys who have been lauded, and all of a sudden there's nobody there. I mean, it's pretty tough. But we're back to crowds.
Back to crowds.
Hopefully people can afford to go. Hopefully the prices will be conducive to that, because rugby's had a problem with that.
Yes.
But it's exciting, and life at level 1 is a lot better than life at level 2, 3 and 4.
Absolutely. Yeah. And coming from the Hawke's Bay, Magpie territory, would it be safe to say that you might even be a Hurricane supporter?
Oh, I was. I'm a Hurricane supporter. I support all the New Zealand teams, but the Hurricanes definitely. Yeah, I mean, I was at the first ever Super Rugby game.
I was at the same game.
Hurricanes Blues, Palmerston North, and the little guys took on the big guys, and it was a level playing field for a change. It was a fantastic game, but the Hurricanes have been great entertainers. Christian Cullen, of course, from those days was an absolute favourite of mine, and Tana, and Jonah even paid for them. I mean, come on, it's all good stuff. And Jerry Collins, the late Jerry Collins as well, is another one, and Rodney Soyalo, those kind of guys who have played for them through the years, and Bull Allen, Norm Hewitt, legends, great guys.
Great guys.
Yeah.
I'll be looking forward to it too, and it's fair to say, without going on too much about me, that my team is the one that I grew up, and that's the Crusaders. And I must say they're an incredibly generous franchise, having actually allowed Dan Carter to go up and play for the Blues. I think that's an act of extreme.
At 38.
He's still got it. He's still got it. So that's an act of incredible generosity.
Well, he was a player worth watching.
He was.
Yeah.
Hey, it's been really great talking to you today. Thanks so much for coming in. I enjoy the Times Age. I think it, without getting overly kind of theoretical or philosophical about these sorts of things, people talk about social capital, what it is that knits a community together, and what it is that provides the wherewithal for a community to be knit together. And media, like the Times Age, is an important part of the social fabric, I think, of a community. It enables you, through your staff, the owners, to tell the stories that are the local stories.
Sure. I don't know how much time we've got left, but, when I was 6, I got I was in the paper standing next to Cal Tremaine after a Ranfurly Shield game. Yeah. My auntie rang up and said, "You're in the paper." And when I was about 30, I went and found that photo.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think that's what newspapers are about, is a local person in the paper. It might be the only time, their story can be told, and that's what your local media are there for.
Yeah, that's what they look, and they become the paper of record too. There's for those of us who've gone and done some genealogical research, papers past, you can go back and you can look at, and that includes papers like the Wairarapa Times Age.
That's right,
it's there, the archive. You can go back to the 1880s.
Well, Gareth Winter and Mark Pacey at Wairarapa Archive, they're just, those guys are the font of all knowledge. They can go back many years.
Okay. So thank you again. Well, that pretty much brings us to an end for this week's edition of the Political Pulse. I hope you've enjoyed listening or watching it. Level 1, one thing that's changed in Level 1 is that, we now can have live music with people going along and listening. So I was looking through the archives, and I found some live music. This is a video of a band, which would be one of my more favourite bands, playing at a pub, which was an Auckland institution, and the Auckland institution was the Glue Pot. And so this is the Mutton Birds and A Thing Well Made.
Almost Almost everything's from overseas. You won't find a better selection. You need to know what you were about. You need to know where you were going and go there in a straight line. And everything else you'd have to shut right out. Can you see the man who made that? Can you see him putting it down and standing there? Can you see the moment when he said, that's it, that's perfect. At a time like that, you wouldn't care about your dog or your mortgage or the fight you had with your wife. 'Cause when a man holds a thing well made, when a man holds a thing well made, there's connection, there's completeness. When a man holds a thing well made. So I do the mail orders. There's nothing much. Some oilskins and a 303 for a hunter over in Westland. And oh yes, one of those AK-47 for some collector down the line.
So that was the Muttonbirds, Don McGlashan, and the song, A Thing Well Made. It's an interesting song if you want to have a look at the lyrics. Don McGlashan actually played a gig here in Masterton a couple of years ago, and he's a wonderful man because he goes to the door at the end of the gig and he says hello as people actually leave. It's a bit like, not that I've been to church for quite a while, but it's a bit like the reverend or the vicar at the end of the service, or the priest, shaking their hands to go. And I was able to actually ask him a question about that particular song, and it turns out that it has a purpose, it has a meaning behind it, and it's in the last line. So I'll just leave it as that. So I'm back with Grant Harding. Grant, thanks again for taking time. I think it might even be your day off today, so I'm doubly grateful to you.
Got the case when we're in already, so I'm okay. Wairarapa Times Age, important part of this local institution. Talked about in the community, keeping an eye on what's happening on local government, local developments, and good to have a sense of what role that plays. So thanks, listeners, for your engagement with us, and thanks for some of the feedback. I actually had some people at Masterton's remarkable farmers market this past weekend come up to me and say, I heard you on the radio, and that was great. So feedback
always very, very much welcomed. Grant, thanks again. And to all you folk out there, be well, be safe, enjoy level 1. And, you know, if you're finding it's a bit challenging navigating your way back into the new normal, I guess we're all feeling a bit that way. So have a great week.